and welcome back. We have with us in studio political analyst Carolyn Sanford. We're happy to have her. She's going to be talking to us about the very, very important topics of the ICJ referendum. Welcome, we're happy to have you.
Well, thank you.
Always
open
insightful.
your eyes, Kevin and Marlene. It's always a pleasure to be here. But I think more importantly, I want to thank you for the series of what I consider hearing the different perspectives on an issue that many people are grappling with. Yeah. It is not a black and white issue, it's not a clear-cut issue, and many people are having uncertainty, confusion. Some people are very clear, but there are so many others, so I want to say thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on the matter.
With such a divisive issue, we thank you for coming forward and speaking about this, because you know, the divide in this issue, I think, it runs as deep as we see with the political divide, where some are vehemently opposed and some are very much secure in their decision to go to the ICJ. But Carolyn, I just want to start off with the most interesting part. Your perspective or your recommendation at this point is completely different.
Yes.
You are talking about now that we should delay this decision, that April 2019 is absolutely the wrong time to be making this decision for our country. So let's just jump right in and find out why you think so.
And I think my position perhaps may be different, because I've always looked at the whole issue of the ICJ within the development path or trajectory for Belize. So I don't take it out as just this solo event or activity, but rather how we view it within where is it as a people we want to go. And then that brings us back to why April 9th. ICJ has the potential to dismember this country. Whether we want to accept that or not, it has that potential. It has the potential to change the trajectory of this country. We were talking just a bit earlier about issues of climate change and so on and so forth. But sometimes we don't see the big picture. We tend to just zoom in on that little thing that makes personal and political statements that make people look good, if I can put it that way. There are 5 key issues that we have to grapple with. We spoke of issues of climate change, shifting geopolitics, demographic changes, widening inequality, and resource depletion. These are 5 issues that Belize has to grapple with or without the ICJ. So you have to look at that big picture and then start asking yourself, where is the path that Belize wants to go? That is 1. And 2, how does the ICJ fit into that? Why do I say delay the ICJ? First of all, you're dealing with a time factor. If an issue that has the potential to make our country extinct, because it does have the potential to dismember, and please, never, I don't go by this statement, we have a solid case and it's going to go. Kevin is an attorney, I studied the law, we all know it's an issue of probability. Yes, so let us from that standpoint say that may or may not happen. But in terms of something so critical that has the potential, as I have said, to dismember this country and to put us on a path of extinction, 9 months to create a register for people to go and make that critical decision, in my mind, cannot happen, should not happen. And it is simply because the whole education puts me at the second point. The whole education process, the campaign process, it is not far-reaching enough, it is not deep enough. If I go back to 1996, for example, when we had a re-registration, we had about 98,000 people on the register. 2 years later, we had an election, 1998. It was 94,000. So there was this slight decrease of about 6% or so, yes? It took us 2 years to get into an election, to prepare for a general election. Admittedly, technology and such changes things, and we can accept that. But then if you look at the second issue within that time frame, where are Belizeans? Who is a Belizean? Yes? So you have the issue of not only the campaign that is not far-reaching enough, because I see campaign taking place on this couch, which is good. I see campaign in the news, but on an issue as critical like this, requires a reaching campaign that goes into every village. We have 192 villages and communities. Where is the campaign within these communities for people to understand not just the yes vote, as some may argue, but what are the consequences of a yes vote and what are the consequences of a no vote? And then you make that decision. So you have a timeline issue, you have an education issue, and you also have an issue of the Guatemalan engagement on the electorate. In 2010, we had about, as far as I recall, 40-something% of our population were Guatemalans. I think it worked out to about 19,000 or something to that effect. Of that, I think 90% or so were 15 and above. So if you put it at about 17,000 or so Guatemalans who, and this is at 2010, we don't know what 2020 is going to bring. You're talking about at least 550 Guatemalans of people of Guatemalan birth, on an average, is in each constituency. Clearly, there's more in Cayo and Belize district and less in Corozal. So every division ought to have or should have somewhere around 500 or so Guatemalans. We are yet not having any clarity on interpretation of the Constitution as it relates to whether a Guatemalan could have been nationalized to become a Belizean. So there are issues there. So you have a timeline, you have a campaign issue, and you have a Guatemalan citizenry issue. And so how is it that we 9 months from now can talk about going into a referendum without having resolved these issues?
So there was a lot there, and I want to unpack it. And let's start with the re-registration portion. Is it that you feel that these issues need to be or should have been addressed before we entered into re-registration? Or is it that now that we have initiated the process, the time is now to figure out who qualifies, whether the Belizean nationality is valid, especially following, as Karim pointed out yesterday, the results of the Senate Select Inquiry.
Right.
What are you saying on that?
In my opinion, it should have been clarified before, but the horse done out of the gate.
Yeah.
So, because you have to deal with that reality. But to my mind, this now even gives you more reason why. It gives even more reason why that we should look at postponing the referendum, because we have not resolved those issues, which then puts this nation at a very
it puts this nation
it puts this nation at in a sort of quagmire, because now all of these issues are out there and we have not resolved them. So how can we go into a referendum to make a critical decision on a matter which has implications for our future with all of these issues in it? It doesn't make sense. Who go into making a decision with all the facts and evidence in front of you? So and clarity on issues.
The two main concerns that the public seems to be having at this time when we talk about re-registration. The first is, of course, as we've mentioned already, is the eligibility of those born in Guatemala who received Belizean nationalities.
And also, remember, we have Belizeans living abroad.
The diaspora would be the second. And I want to get your
thoughts on that. And I want to put
that.
them as a priority. I prefer putting them at the front as against the second. Because at a minimum, they are Belizean either by birth or by descent. So the questionality of their Belizeanness then is not there.
Can I ask
but there is a question as to, I mean, the law is very clear when it comes to people living abroad. And one of the things we really don't have clear, and many people just make different estimations with numbers, is the size of the diaspora. And also their interests in Belize. There are Belizeans who have homes and come back frequently, and there's some who are less involved with the country itself.
And I think if one can look at Belizeans vis-a-vis Guatemalans, Belizeans going abroad, Guatemalans coming to Belize, I will never do the far reach and one that fits all to say every Belizean that has left this country want to come home and see good for Belize. And similarly, I will not say every Guatemalan who comes to Belize wants to see good for Guatemala, I want to go back.
Yeah.
I don't fall into that trap. But at a minimum, we need to have clarity on what can happen so that even those persons who we have heard said, well, they have been here for 30 years, 25 years, they themselves are living under some veneer of uncertainty. And that uncertainty affects relationship between people and between communities, because those are the things that can lead to conflict within communities and within countries when you start having differences based on race and ethnicity and so on. So those issues need to be clarified. You spoke earlier about the issue of the re-registration process and what could have happened first. What also happens to Belizeans who are abroad who may want to vote? Now may be the time for us to have considered how we go into proxy voting. How in the future do we necessarily have to go through an entire re-registration exercise?
Yeah.
Or you do what some countries do, is that you monitor things like voting patterns, whether people vote. If you don't vote in 3 elections, you're send a letter to question whether you still, in the country, possible to. There are things that we could have done within this process, but my position is that we are rushing a scenario to please somebody and not ourselves. We ought to be making decisions that are tied into where we want to go as a people. When you reach the point in your country where you have to be given money from outside to carry on your own campaign, then something is wrong with us. We need to sit back and say, pause, press the pause button, and nothing is wrong with pressing the pause button. How often in this process you heard first there was a agreement that we do it together, yes? Then they changed that date. Then they change the fact that we're doing it together, and then they will do it. The Guatemala was to do it
at an earlier date.
At another. Then they changed that date. How often did that happen? So why is it that we have to be boxed in to this 9 months? And I think it becomes even more crucial when I think of two things, Marlene and Kevin. One, someone called Asad Schumann while he was on a show. And they asked Asad, they said, why is it, and I say Dr. Asad Schumann. You know, you get used to say with Dr. Asad Schumann. They asked the question, they say, why is it that we have to go to this referendum? Why we have to follow Guatemala and go to the referendum? His response was, that not Guatemala wanted this referendum, that we.
Yeah.
And that in itself made me pause.
Yeah.
Because then I started to ask the question, at what time did the people of Belize say to the political parties since 1981? What time did the people of Belize say, we want to go to the ICJ? Yes, the referendum is now going to. Yeah. But at what time did that happen? So to my mind, that was.
But isn't that the point of having leaders, that they would make decisions in the best interest of the people of their country?
But at any point in time on matters of national importance, that is why we have a constitution that speaks to these issues. In fact, an issue that somebody and I were discussing, and to just add to that, and I think Kevin can maybe speak to this as an attorney. The borders of our country are fixed according to our constitution. Yes. Nobody can go out nowhere and sign off our borders. So all of these things, to my mind, are not properly explained to our people simply because you have one side that says, yes, and this is where we are going, and I'm not crazy. I mean, I am not, because I don't see that pathway makes me crazy. What I am saying to the government, to all political parties and to all people, let us press pause. We have reason to press pause. Let us unravel these issues. Yes? And by unraveling issues, because Marlene and Kevin, that then put us in this. And really what happened right now, that the chickens have come home to roost. Because after all that they have done, and I continue to point out as well that, in my opinion, that they have blinked. Up to 1981, the British did blink, you know. The British sat across the table and didn't blink. George Price never blinked, you know. But somewhere along the line, we started to blink. From the Maritime Areas Act, to the rape of our resources, to the registration of almost 20,000 Guatemalans as citizens, we have blinked. We have blinked to the point where we have now become so economically entrapped. 10 million we export to them, and they export, what, 100 million? They own a lot of our resources. We have blinked because nobody is thinking about what is the best path for Belize. That has not been a conversation, and I think that is a conversation that we need to have. What is the best path for Belize, and what it is that we need to do to ensure that our nation state is preserved for the next generation.
Carolyn, the decisions being made by our directorate must have some foundation. They surely looked at the timeline,
Yes.
and they surely, contrary to your position, believe that we surely can hit it, and somehow believe that we are only stalling the inevitable, and that this is the only option that we have, and that really and truly saying delayed is not an alternative solution to going to court. It's just a matter of timing. Is your position, yes, we have to go to the court, but the time isn't now?
From my perspective, I always believe that nothing is impossible. With the will of the people and the will of God, nothing is impossible. So to my mind, nothing is impossible. And by my saying that, I am simply saying, and I remember Assad Schuman, again, Dr. Assad Schuman said, man, Guatemala is a serial breaker of agreements, right? While we may not want to be considered a serial breaker of agreements, at least at a minimum, I think we owe the Belizean people to step back and to have a conversation that then when they do go to the court, to the ICJ, they will be able to make an informed decision. And I think that is what is required. But not only that the Belizean is able to make an informed position, but that all Belizeans, whether we are living here, whether we are living abroad, once we have that interest and that passion for our country. For me as an individual, I have long argued that, in my opinion again, that ICJ is not the solution. Because while we are preparing and having all these great discussions, they're encroaching on our borders. They're continuing to do all the things that they ought not to do, and we're simply putting all our eggs in some basket that is taking us to the ICJ. There is no Messiah out there for we, Marlene and Kevin. Everybody that is out there, whether it's the great United States of America, the United Kingdom, all the friends and allies, they all have their agenda. And I respect them because they should. I can't vex with President Trump when he says, these are the things I want to do to protect my country. We must sit back and say what it is we need to do to protect this country. And nobody is thinking about that. We're simply having this conversation as, oh, it's ICJ or not. But I think what is also important, and sometimes we don't appreciate this, in 1980 and 81, leading into independence, it was a whole different ballgame in terms of our demographics. And remember I mentioned that the whole demographic changes, whole difference. But what was also different, in my opinion, was those persons who were representing us in the House of Representatives, right? If you ask 2018, we have House members who are married to Guatemalans. We have members who they wait for them papers to go to states. You know that, right? There was a particular area representative who said, my papers there at the embassy. He only look for go to states. But these are the people who are making decisions about the future of this country. So when you ask the question, why pause? We have to pause. There has to be a pause.
The second part of your objection seems to be that there are too many boxes open.
Yes.
I could hear the naysayers saying that that's the nature of political reality.
Yes.
There's never a time when there's no box open.
Yeah. I
so that
agree.
you're asking for a time which doesn't exist. We're going to delay and wait for a time that doesn't exist.
I agree. But what is wrong with the box? What is wrong with us delaying on a matter that is important as this? This is a key critical issue that has implications for the future of your country. Yeah. 20, 30 years from now, you might not be called a Belizean because Belize no longer exists.
Half at least.
Yes,
Well,
so don't about the box. Let that thing go open.
Yeah.
But this particular box, right?
And the court could close it.
The
Pardon me?
question,
Exactly.
The court could close
Exactly. But the court can only close it legally. Right? As with many things, my point goes back to, again, the court can do what it's. Who is going to enforce the decision of the
US
court?
critical
Such,
court.
if such a decision even is made in our favor, and then the big question becomes, will it be made? What is the probability? But put all that aside, Kevin and Marlene. Nobody can take care of you but you.
Yeah.
You cannot expect the same people who create the problem. Remember Einstein? To solve the problem? We must remember that.
But let me ask another question, and I think Kevin mentioning the half of the map is one of the critical points. The advantage, and we won't like to hear this, that the Guatemalans had going into their referendum, even with their low turnout overall, but high historically for referendums, was that they have been in a continuous education process on this issue from birth. It's in their curriculum. They learn it. They believe it.
179 years ago, 1839 it started.
And so the argument, I suppose, that can be made is that we perhaps will never be adequately informed on this issue. Going back to understand 179 years of history of an issue for any Belizean is daunting. One, and I find this one very often, and perhaps it's something we need to address, I find that there are people in the public who don't understand what the ICJ is. So often the ICJ and the CCJ are believed to be one. And a general mistrust that we have in our judiciary in Belize is expanded to these international courts as well. So where we talk of legality and soundness of cases, people are asking, well, who paid the judge? Who got a more expensive lawyer? Who is a bigger person in this thing? Because that's what we know in our court system.
That's right.
There is also the other element that I see is even what the claim is, where we had the foreign minister at our last town hall talking of it being a claim of the entire country. Yet we've seen maps where we assume them to be true, that it's going to be half the country. So we don't even know what the claim is. So my argument is, or my question to you is, even if we delay, will we ever have sufficient time to be adequately informed on the risks, the pros and the cons of this part of going to the ICJ?
Marlene, you just have the answer right there. When you are saying that we don't even know what the claim is. You are saying it, but let me put a step back and I will share a quick analogy. Let us look at Cuba. After the revolution in Cuba, there was this great understanding and appreciation that there was high levels of illiteracy. You know what they did? They shut down for a year, I think it was, trained people and sent them out into the entire Cuba landscape under an education program because they found it so important to the future of Cuba, yes, that the literacy rate be elevated. Let us come back to the Guatemalan. We are even in a better position. Everybody nearly have a social media platform, smartphone. Open your eyes. I don't know how many people looking, not only in Belize, remember I spoke from the global perspective, globally. So it makes it even better for us that what it took George Price 31 years to achieve in terms of the independence movement, technology, better transportation, yes, enables us to do it in a much collapsed period of time. Now, responding directly to say, would we ever have 100%? Of course not. I don't think that it is possible to do that. Even though I said nothing is impossible, the probability is that that won't happen. But at a minimum, you want the Belizean people to understand a couple things. And one such thing is that Guatemala has a claim over us. It started in 1839, that's 179 years ago. Time is of no consequence to fanatics. Us going to the ICJ will not change their outlook. Whatever happens, it will not change their outlook. So we must not only look at this claim as, and this is go back to the ICJ issue, on April 9th. We must not only look at it as a one-stop point, but rather as a process, as a journey of educating our people, building their knowledge for us to appreciate and understand what the claim is, where it started, where is it now, and what can happen in the future. But more importantly, what role we play.
A longer campaign means more resources.
But we must find the resources to do the things that are important to nation building. Again, that comes back to our whole idea and mentality as to how we treat development. We find money for Godupi bill and those kinds of things, and we can't find money to ensure that this nation state is preserved for the next generation. We find money for all kinds of things, man. Let us start reassessing, and I believe the Belizean people are at a moment of lowest cynicism, highest, let me refrain, highest cynicism, disillusionment, and frustration with Belize and politicians and so on and so forth. So this also creates an opportunity to start having a conversation with the next generation of leaders. Me might not be there very long, you know, Marlene, we are on our way out. There's a new generation that must be molded and nurtured and shaped into becoming the leaders. And the leadership is no longer just about being about Belize. It's about understanding how you're going to assert yourself in a global environment. Yeah. So we can look at this and say we can find the resources for it. We can have a country where we borrow for things that may not be as important. I am not the one who could put the either either. In other words, when people say, well, we shouldn't borrow for roads or be careful invest in human, it's not about one or other. You need certain things to take a development path. But your path must be so calibrated that it is to bring about certain things. And to my mind, the priority goal must always be ensuring that we have a nation state of Belize for the next generation. And we have to do what is required to do to maintain that.
The snap response and the narrative from the yes camp is that, I don't want, not the insulting way of saying those who say no are crazy, because I think that is very unfortunate. I think it creates an obstacle in a very short timeline. But more so, in similar vein, the tenure seems to be that if you are saying no or delay or any of these things, that you're simply misinformed, that you don't have all the information. If you did have all the information, you'd be jumping up and down and saying, hell yes, let's do it tomorrow. And so the approach seems to be that I'm going to educate you as far up to that point as I can, and when the 9 months come, I'm going to then put on political influence to try to sway you to get to a healthy point. It's kind of like, but I can see where it comes in. For example, a doctor. You have a rash on your hand and you're thinking, this is nothing. But a doctor looks at it and says, you know what, you got to go because it means liver failure. Yeah. And so they try to get you to the hospital and they try to talk to you to get you there. And if you don't want to go, after a point in time, they decide, you know what, I'm going to almost have to push you out of your house and force you into the birth ambulance and get you to the hospital. Yeah. Is it misinformation? Is it fear-mongering? Is it ignorance?
I was convinced perhaps maybe that it was what you call, I tell you to do this, but because I know you have no trust or confidence in me, you're going to do the opposite. And maybe that may be the strategy. And maybe we become heroes at the end of the day. I don't know. But what I'm going to say, it could very real. I don't know, I don't understand the strategy behind what people are thinking, their motive. I can only take a look from the outside. But what I want to say, that who constructs the narrative, right? Only they know what their motive is. But for us as Belizeans, we have to step back, we have to pause, we have to start asking ourselves, from 1981 to 2018, they blinked. They blinked in so many ways. What is it that we need to do now to stop blinking? What did position us in such a way? And I often say, I am in no way saying that if we don't go to the ICJ, we are all gone. I am not saying that. I am simply saying that let us look at the ICJ within the big picture. That is one. Two, I am also saying that we cannot rely on no one to define our path and to be our protectors and saviors.
So what are you talking about? A mutual approach, educating while still exerting a stronger stance internationally?
Of course, you can't stop being diplomatic. You can't stop reaching out to the friends. You can't stop talking. That's the global side of things. We have to continue to have conversations with the US. We have to continue to have conversations with UK. We have to, with all the friends, we have to. But we have to do it in a way which says this is the path that we want to take. And not someone coming in and telling you this is what you have to do in order to get this. Because that is where we have become trapped. We owe so much money that when you talk earlier about resources, then we have to step back and say, when you have to rely, Marlene, on someone to feed you and clothe you and pay your bills, what does that make you?
I wanna move forward a bit with the conversation, because one of the things I find really interesting in what you've been expressing is that it's pressing pause, but it's pressing pause with a significant purpose.
That's right.
It is pause not just to continue the education campaign, but to address some of the critical developmental issues that the countries have. And, you know, as I read it, it makes so much sense. But also, I feel like Kevin did, like, are we ever going to get there? Are we ever going to work on proper representation, on addressing the issue of poverty, on some of these socioeconomic issues that we have? I mean, it feels like we are continuously burdened with. So my question is just, how realistic is the expectation that we can set pause and somehow get all the leaders and decision makers in the right frame of mind to focus on what should have been the priorities many years ago?
Yeah. For me, again, let me say, I'm not saying let us stop pause. Let us press pause and nothing happens thereafter. I'm saying let us set pause and rethink. Yes? At the minimum, we are starting the process. Now, at some point down the road, we would have been able to address 3 or 4 issues of maybe 10 or 15. But at a minimum, we have now an understanding that regardless of how we move, this is how we are moving and why we are moving and the purpose for which we are moving. Pressing pause does not say everything get dropped. Pressing pause is like you grow up, right? Let us, as a youth, you're in your parents' home, they take care of you, etc. You grow up. 20s are the year, the zealousness, and they do your thing and blah, blah, blah. Then somewhere when you start to hit 30, and 40, you start to think retirement, I save enough money, my house pay for, you're not stop living.
Yeah, you just start
So
planning.
Belize now and stop being in any developmental mode or path. But you're simply saying, boy, I have to sit down now and reflect. And I think that is what I'm saying. And it doesn't mean that maybe within a year thereafter, and just let me stick a pin here. Re-registration, go back again to 1996. It wasn't until 2 years later, in 1998, that we had election. So we were in a process. Re-registration doesn't stop. I think there is some confusion on that as well. People are feeling that this thing, that July, August, the only issue that comes in is that you have to be registered somewhere by March 12, I think.
Before the referendum.
Before the referendum, but it doesn't stop you.
But you can still continue registering
but the
even after
whole
March.
will be able to register by then. And I think that becomes an
Let me clarify that
issue.
here, because I do think that that's something that we have to continuously educate people. It continues for 2 months in the format that it is now, where all these centers are open, it's far more accessible, it has better hours, you can go in and get it done. But other than that, once this period is over, you go into your regular elections and boundaries and do it. But I have to add one element to what we are saying right now, because we're talking about pressing pause, we're talking about, you know, and I don't think anybody would disagree that we need to tackle some of our major developmental issues. But let's Belizeanize it. We work on election cycles. Our leaders work on how they will get themselves or their parties back in office. It is a terrible practice, but it's one that we have become accustomed to. In fact, we will see work within the next year that will, and everybody says it, oh, election season, I'll get my street paved, I'll get my scholarship, I'll get, it is the time to collect. And is it really realistic to say we pause the referendum now and anybody will be putting any resources, any interest, any additional effort in properly educating people when there's an election to win?
Well, perhaps this represents an opportunity for those persons in leadership position to start the process of restoring trust and confidence in politics once again. And perhaps if they are truly leaders and they truly want to see the best for Belize, this gives them the opportunity to press the pause and say, you know what, as a leader, this is why I am a leader.
And Carolyn, you know, as you say that, I smile internally and externally because there's a presupposition in the suggestion to pause. One is that we have the quality of leadership and leaders. When I talk about leadership, I'm talking about the people who are the parliamentarians who are making these decisions. And I'm not sure that we have, because of the second thing, which is the political history. We don't have a political history or culture of where we don't have something on the foreburner that we think about it. We have a Christmas culture. Nobody buys Christmas ornaments at Easter time. And the thing with the referendum is that it is far ahead. We're at reregistration. So we move from event to event. We're weekend people to the next holiday. And so this whole belief, which is why I completely disagree with this thing that people have the misconception it's 2 months. Coffee, that's why you have these trade shows where they sell phones at certain places and they have certain seasons. We Belizeans look at something as being in season, like crabo. So it's this is the time to re-register. When the season closes, we go back to living. 40% of us are poor. But I want to go back to the question as to whether or not you're being a little bit too optimistic in suggesting a pause, because we don't have the political history to support that we will deal with other issues, and we don't have the quality of leaders that are capable of pushing this forward.
Well, I'm always of the opinion, like the great Martin Luther King, that says, the measure of a man's worth is not where he stands in time of comfort, but where he stands in time of controversies. I have all hope for a better Belize. I have all optimism, because if I lose my hope and I lose my optimism about my country, then what it is that I have to live for. Yes? So we must always have hope and we must always have optimism. And I have hope whenever I move around and I see particularly our young people, how many of them are becoming more involved and more engaged. They give me hope. Now, whether we have within the existing stock, right? That becomes a question, right? And that's a conversation for another day. But you have to have hope. You have to have optimism, because if I don't have optimism, if I don't have hope, then, you know, I go back and I think of you talk about political history. We do have a rich history of individuals who rose to the challenge.
Yes.
Yeah, we do. So let us not discount
and
that.
let me push that further, because what is your, I'm really putting you on the spot here, but just in the interest of time, you know, I think the position that you're putting forward is optimistic, but definitely one, it makes sense. When you talk about tackling developmental issues specifically, you know, these should have been priorities a long time ago. But my question is, where do you see yourself in this other than having a different opinion? We have seen where there have been shifts within our political system, but it's only guided by pressure, by people's pressure, by the everyday man saying, okay, this is what we want, we won't stop till we get it. Are you advocating, rallying, or simply just offering an alternative?
When I started the conversation on this, and perhaps I would say continue the conversation, it is not what I have not been saying consistently for many years. I have for many years been consistent to say we have to sleep with our own eyes, and that ICJ is not the solution is within us. As an individual, I not only advocate, what I try to do when I have conversations, which I do, and which I've even accelerated in terms of my engagement with people, in terms of having those very conversations that we have. I am also the member of a political party. So I tried within that space to have the conversations to say to our people within our party that we can no longer take what I consider this cowardly path that we have continuously taken as a nation to be reliant on everybody out there for feed with, for mine with, for clothe with, for defend with. That is not what being independent about. So it is very key for us to make that change from what I call a peaceful, constructive Belizean revolution to a more progressive change and reform revolution, that which will prioritize the preservation of the nation state of Belize. And we do what we have to do. So I function within a political sphere, I function within a community sphere, and I also function I try my best in when opportunities like this come along to share it, but I've always been consistent with that from time as immemorial.
And where can people access what you have written, your position on this so far?
Well, currently it is on my Facebook page, which most people who are on social media know. But what I'm also trying to do is to develop a greater directory to share more, not only on social media. I've always had the opportunity through the Amandala from time to time. I've written positions on the trajectory of Belize, the issue that we need to start looking at a national policy for defense and so on. So I've done that, and of course I use the talk shows.
Carolyn, can I ask my final question? Which is, we're talking about political history. And I look at the ICJ issue as similar to independence.
Yes.
The parallels are beautiful. And I can remember looking at that interview by, I think, Ted Arana, in front of Brody's, and they were asking whether or not we should go to independence, and his position was very no. I mean, this is the worst. In the next 4 years, good God, we're going to be. How would you feel? Well, how would you feel if 4 years from now, Mr. Sederington is right, and the persons who had voted no were crazy, and the people who voted yes did save Belize? And this ICJ issue is behind us. The Security Council has helped us to put the border. And you are in a position of Ted Arana of saying, good God. And the similarities in terms of just simply, Belize went into riots before independence.
The only
but it was the right decision.
Then was that the leaders had full control of the decision.
But how would you feel if
well, I think
you're on the wrong side of history?
Your premise is totally flawed.
I'm just asking.
Well, yes, because your premise is totally flawed. Because the issue for Ted Aranda at the time was, are we ready for independence? No, we are not. We still need the British, etc., etc.
Are we ready for the ICJ?
At this point, at that point in time, the defense guarantee was, as far as I recall, was a key issue for many people. Is it not the same issue that we have today? So let us
came
not
through at the 11th hour.
Yes, so let us not discount the fact that they were not saying, they were saying no to independence on the premise that we had no defense guarantee. But I want to say, I am not in any way saying, I want it to be clear, that we ought not to go to the ICJ. I'm saying we need to look at the ICJ within the big picture, that it is not the only solution, that going to the ICJ or not going to the ICJ will not change the facts. This is my point. Will not change the fact that 179 years ago, Guatemala laid claim to the nation state of Belize. And 179 years from now, if we exist, the claim is still going to be there. So the ICJ is not the major consideration for us at this time. That is my argument. Yes?
Carolyn, thank you for coming in,
adding
one new perspective to this conversation, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
You are welcome. Always a pleasure to be on this couch.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about Peace in the Parks, an initiative that is working to make Belize safe for children. So stay tuned.